Ladies and gentlemen, we are live yet again on a Wednesday. This is DebateSensei. We got Matt Shapiro, Esquire.
Hello.
We got Tim from Visolutions, San Diego State, assistant to the director. Jerry Miller, the debate coach, communications professor. Today, we're going to talk about disadvantages, specifically how to respond to them. And I kind of am framing this episode around how I was taught, and there's around 5 basic answers. In my opinion, even if there are more answers, honestly, 5 is a good number. You know what I mean? It's like, and I think you start getting diminishing returns the more that you try. It's like, oh, there's 7 of them. Oh, there's 9, and
there's not that many. Like when you're attacked by a disadvantage, you've got fire, knives, throwing stars, and body weight. I think it's only 4 actually.
Or if you're like a John Wooden kind of guy, it's like, you get the fundamentals. These are 5 fundamental, arguments that you can make. I am sure Jared is sure, Tim is sure. There's a plethora of, arguments you can make, and the more you're in it, the more you'll figure them out. But these 5 are pretty much, you get a DA, you should look for one of these.
Yeah, I mean, if nothing else, you'll always have a response. I've not come across a disadvantage where you can't use at least one of these sort of stock responses against it. Yeah. Okay. All right. So without further ado, let's go through the 5 one at a time. Clearly in a 30-minute spot, we're going to be given, 5 to 6 minutes for each one. So here we go. First one.
Exactly.
All right. Exactly. So start the clock. The first one, no link. Whenever I teach students about disadvantages, I teach them the first words out of my mouth is a disadvantage is you telling a tragic story. You got to, make it relevant to what the affirmative said, but you're telling a tragedy. It's going to end in tragedy. You have to set the scene. And so the setting the scene is more the uniqueness. We'll get to that. Right? But after you set the scene, you have to set actions in motion. You have to have things happen, right? And that's the link story. And so when you say no link, you're basically responding. It's kind of like these 2 things are not connected. All right. Like your story that you're weaving. Yeah.
Like the cause they're giving is not the cause of the effect that they're trying to show. Right. Like it reminds me kind of like in personal injury law where we have a saying. It's like, if I get in a car accident and then I sue you for getting a cold. Okay. Yeah. And assuming we're not in the world of COVID-19 where everyone's freaking out, I'm talking about I get in a car accident and then I sue you for getting a cold. The link, I know it's not quite the same in debate, but the link, the cause was not the cause that you're saying is not the cause of your impacts. Essentially, it's kind of how I see it, right?
I like that. I think it's a good example. It's a really nice one. Now, strangely enough, I like the climate change debate in sort of illustrating all the different responses. And here's the thing about the climate change debate is that these responses aren't necessarily good responses. I'm just saying that these responses are out there and people can reference them and they're going, oh, that's how it is. It's like, 4 out of 5 of them are not particularly good responses, but they fit the template is what I'm saying. So like in the climate change debate, the no link response is that CO2 is a magic elixir of life that helps plants grow. So more CO2 is good, right? So that's more of a turn later on. But
methane is the cause, not CO2, something like that, right?
Yeah, that could be also something else, right? But I think we've heard those arguments in on our congressional floor, on articles, editorials, and things like that. Not a particularly. I think the evidence definitely outweighs, but that's an illustration of a no link argument, in my opinion.
One of the things we were talking about just before we jumped on here was like when someone is making an argument that is blatantly false, right? So you receive a disadvantage for which there is abundant contrary evidence, right? Like they're making an argument. So I'll take the heat on it. Someone says like, oh, we shouldn't vaccinate. The disadvantage to vaccines is that it causes autism. You're like, all right, I have 65 responses, right? Like, and they are all evidence to the contrary. You would say that kind of response would fit under a no link, you'd say?
Yeah, I would absolutely, because they have to meet the argument in the disadvantage that there is a link between vaccines and autism, right? Yeah. And so when you respond to it, you're like, no, that is not true. And so I would label that a no link argument. And remember, these labels are really helpful for people like your judges to take notes. If you're really consistent with the jargon that we're talking about, it actually makes the note taking simpler, and that's why people really like it. You know what I mean? At least the people that are in the event itself. You know, so no link. In fact, I would always just do a giant L and put that circle with the slash through it. That's my no link symbol on there, just really quick, right? So
and I think just to bring this to the it's a question, it's a statement. Like you. With a no link, you're not necessarily saying that some impact isn't happening. You're just saying that their harms aren't causing the impact, right? So it's not like saying I guess it's just a very fundamental premise where you're not arguing that there is no global warming, or maybe you're not arguing, maybe you are, maybe you're not. But my point is like saying it's methane, not CO2, is not saying that global warming isn't happening, and it's just a link. It's a link that you're attacking.
I think it might be. I think you would be saying that like it's just like the climate, weather isn't going. That would be another type of response. It's kind of hard to actually argue that, considering like we've had the hottest years on record for 9 out of the last 10 years. And so. That would still be that'd be a no link argument, not a particularly good one, but it definitely fits the template. Right. I guess what people might realize by the time this video is over is the nuance in what we're saying between, say, no link and non-unique. I think those were probably gonna be like one of the trickier ones. They are very nuanced. Even though once you kind of understand it, they're not. But from someone who's learning, I just wanted to be. I realize what you're saying, Jared, and I agree with you that like you could kind of debate on all of this. I'm just saying that. The argument focusing on it was a lot more popular like 10 years ago. It was like 10 years ago that was a much more popular argument, but now the evidence just keeps on kind of pointing out. It's like no, like things are going up overall. You know what I mean? It's like we still have weather and we still have seasons, but the overall.
I wouldn't recommend arguing CO2 doesn't contribute to climate change. Let's just start with that. This is kind of
people have like that's the point. It's like people have.
I was just trying to bring an example.
No, but that goes in with the like CO2 is good is the argument. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so and people have said that like there is evidence out there, and like there's some common sense arguments too, because like greenhouses use this stuff in order to maintain temperature, but that's why it's a greenhouse gas. We don't want a greenhouse over the entire world. It's nice to have that here and there, you know what I mean? But we don't want a whole world of greenhouse. That is where the problems come in. So we don't want those greenhouse gases outside of greenhouses, right?
CO2 is good with making fog at your Halloween party. That's what CO2 is. We can all get behind that.
But so I think if someone is actually making a CO2 is good argument, that's not quite the same. I wouldn't say that's necessarily a no link. I think you hinted at it a minute ago, and maybe this is the next one that you've got up. But I think that's actually more of a turn than it is a no link, because that's actually saying CO2 is no. That's not something that's harmful. That is helpful. Therefore, it's my ground, right? So
right. Like that. That is somewhat of a turn. That is somewhat of a turn. Yeah, there's a couple ways to do it as well. But you know what we're dragging on. Let's make sure we do this one. This one might be a little bit shorter because the Brink argument. I don't hear it as much as a stock issue on disadvantages as much anymore, right? So it used to be like link Brink impact. Some people still kind of explain it that way, but now it's like more of a link internal link, uniqueness link internal link impact, right? I'm I'm sorry, but that's
we jumped around.
Yeah. But the Brink is a really interesting one that's illustrated by the global warming argument, which is so like the Brink story would be like, remember that old movie Day After Tomorrow, that global warming thing where there's like trigger, and it's just this massive northern hemisphere.
Dennis Quaid or something like that.
I believe so.
Randy Quaid.
No, not Randy Quaid. No. Yeah, that would have been
Jake Gyllenhaal.
It wasn't it?
I think so. I just watched it the other day. By the way, in the middle, in coronavirus capital riot world, go watch all the End of the World movies. They're great. They make you feel a little bit better.
they seem like sweet fairy tales.
2012, Day After Tomorrow, Apocalypto, they're all good.
Yeah. So Brink, and maybe Jared, you can clarify this for me. The difference between Brink and inherency, I've honestly never heard that. I've always just heard the two interchangeable. Is there a difference that you would see between Brink and inherency?
Yeah. So a Brink is like a bright line. And so when somebody says like no bright line, that's like a no Brink story, right? Like that you're basically saying, so one of my favorite illustrations is smoking. Like people are like, you shouldn't smoke. You're like, yeah, but this one isn't going to give me cancer. So I'm just going to fix this one right here. You know what I mean? That's
it's not denying your link. It's just saying that you're never going to hit the tipping point. Does that make sense? Like the nuclear war argument at the end of it all, like you're kind of saying like, yeah, you're right. This is bad, but it's not going to lead to that problem.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, it's not going to trigger those massive effects that you're talking about. So you got to think about it as a trigger. And if you win the no Brink argument, you basically are saying that it is a linear disadvantage, right? And that's it's not quite the same thing. I'm sorry. It's like,
I don't even know what linear disadvantage means. So let's start with that. What does that mean?
Well, a linear disadvantage means just that the things get progressively worse. It never triggers into an impact. All right. And so that's like the Day After Tomorrow. It's kind of like, okay, global warming's happening, but let's calm down. We're not going to have a Day After Tomorrow type scenario. It is a linear disadvantage. Things will get progressively warmer and we can make them progressively cooler. So let's be smart about this and not be rash. Right. I think that falls under like a no Brink sort of
versus like an acute disadvantage. I don't know what the word would be, but like a terminal or
exponential.
Yeah. Exponential is good. I think a terminal impact, a terminal disadvantage is also
that. I don't think economic arguments are probably really good. So no Brink is probably a really good disadvantage or a good response to economic related DAs. So when people are saying like, and this is going to lead to economic collapse, be like, easy, Tiger. Like our economy is pretty resilient. It's gone through a lot of stuff and not collapsed. Like even the Great Depression wasn't a collapse, right? Like there's so many things. Like,
so if you're talking
the
about
economy's taking so many hits, it's probably not fair to say that like this one spending bill will cause a genuine collapse. Like that's a really dramatic thing. Like the government has shut down lots of times in recent history, and that hasn't caused collapse. Like there's been lots of crazy things that hasn't caused.
It might be bad. It won't be as bad as they're saying.
Right. And is a good example. And just general spending is like we spend money like this all the time. This isn't going to be. It's not going to trigger a impact.
And
so, in the interest of time, so we said no link, right? And that's when your harms don't necessarily link up to your impacts. We talked about no Brink, meaning you're not gonna, there's no tipping point where it's going to trigger all this bad stuff. Even if you have some links, you're not conceding necessarily. You're just not attacking the link. And the next one, Jared, go ahead.
No impact. So this one's like the so what? It's kind of like, okay, so like so we're going to experience a 1 degree increase. So who cares? You know what I mean?
I live in Chicago. I wish it would be warmer here.
Yeah, right? yeah. But it's also you're just saying, I want to kind of keep it there. It's kind of like, who cares? Like, this isn't going to hurt me at all. Not a very popular.
I think that's a very dangerous one because that's granting them uniqueness and it's granting them links and it's giving them everything but the impact. So then all they've got to do is start arguing on like, probability and like, if just this thing slips through. So I think that is probably one of the weaker responses to a DA.
Yeah, but the thing is, where it comes in most useful is when people just don't explain the impact. And so, like nuclear war, don't include it. You know what I mean? It's kind of like they haven't. So or when somebody's like really, really vague. All right, and the impact of this is tyranny. I like doing a no impact response to that thing. I'm kind of like, you know what? People say that we're living in tyranny right now. It's not bad. You know what I mean? I don't know what you mean by tyranny. You haven't explained it. So a lot of people kind of respond by saying no terminal impact. All right. So that's like, I think that's the most popular no impact response is no terminal impact. It's like you just kind of throw out this vague idea that things will generally be icky. Like, I don't know what that means.
I think like political, so ticks disadvantages, I feel like frequently get there where it's like, and this like harms democracy. Like, what does that mean, right? Like, what is, like, does democracy get a black eye? And like, if so, does that mean that I don't get to vote? Like, you know, when there aren't details that are fleshed out. That's a really good point. Okay. So for very vague impacts.
Right. When you go ahead.
It's a question. I mean, like when we say no impacts, Jared, I mean, are we saying that the impacts they stated are not significant, or are you saying that we are not giving them their impacts?
So one thing is they never stated their impacts. Don't do the work for them. That's one good no impact, right? The no terminal impacts are kind of like you're saying that is another way, in my opinion, of saying no, not significant enough. It's like you said that it could be vague or insignificant, right? It's like the impact to climate change is ski season is ruined.
Like, you know what's funny? An impact would be like if someone said that your plan is bad because it's going to cost taxpayers a lot of money, and then you argue like no impacts, like the American taxpayer doesn't it doesn't factor in to the point where they're going to be affected.
Yeah, you could say that. It's kind of like, we pay the lowest taxes out of most developed nations is, an argument. Like paying a little bit more taxes doesn't seem it's going to create anything really bad. So I think most people would say no terminal impact in that situation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it just doesn't get to a significance. All right. The last two, I think I got more to say on. So let's spend the rest of the time on that. Here we go. All right. Non-unique.
This is the one that people have the hardest time with. And
at least once or twice per tournament incorrectly used. It sounds cool. It sounds debate jargony. And like people love to cast it around and they're not accurately using it fairly regularly.
They get it confused with the exact arguments we made in this video already. I mean,
the no link arguments, the no break argument. Those things, the non-unique. So like, non-unique. People, we don't pay enough in taxes right now. No, that's not how you do it. Okay. So there's two ways of thinking of non-unique. There's two ways. So first, if this disadvantage were true, it should have happened already. And second, this disadvantage is going to happen with or without the plan.
Right.
Those are my two ways of doing it. All right. So it's like this is going to happen anyways. Is like back to the climate change one. This is the natural cycles. Right. It's kind of like we always go through climate change, even without people. It's kind of like it goes through natural cycles and stuff like that. So it's going to happen no matter what. All right. I think that's a weak non-unique argument.
But that's the way they want to use it.
Yeah. But I think a stronger non-unique argument is it's too late. We passed the point of no return. It's actually become my favorite response to climate change disadvantages. It's kind of like it's going to happen no matter what, man. Like I'm sorry.
No matter what bill you pass, it's coming.
Yeah. It's like even like we shut down for an entire year of travel. Right? It's hard. Yeah. It's like it's been really tough. We'd have to do this for like 5 more years to actually turn back climate change.
But that's even just stopping. Like that's not accounting for like sequestration. Like they're saying like even if all travel stopped, you still have to actually recapture the carbon because like we're just not capturing enough. We keep like burning trees and like doubling down on
problem.
So so there's like that's an interesting way. I have not heard non-unique used necessarily in that way. That's a clever way to
I think it's one of the strongest arguments in response to climate change. In fact,
in a very basic way, because everything Jared said is right. But I mean, just for anyone who may not, I mean, just any time that you feel like there are other variables that cause this problem, there are multiple variables that cause this problem, and that this plan doesn't specifically, solve or whatever. Like you can't stop it. Beyond the text of the plan, the non-unique then that's when non-unique comes to the front. Like it's not saying that their link doesn't connect to their impacts. It's not what we're saying. We're not saying that there's no tipping point. We're not saying that there are no impacts. We're saying that no matter what happens, or there are other things beyond this plan that are going to happen that will cause this problem, or whatever it may be. I'm getting a little confused, but my point is just that's kind of why non-unique is hard. By the way, I mean these things are not simple, and it's funny because after people have been doing it for a while, I sit there with my girlfriend and I'll be like, oh, non-unique, like that's a problem no matter what you do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And not you do, but like just there are things that happen in the news and life where like the non-unique argument pops into my head. Where I'm like, well, see, you're saying it's because of this, but it could be, could be because of anything. Autism comes to mind. There's a million things. Is it the vaccine or is it all the cheeseburgers you've been eating? You know what I mean?
Tim, what you were talking about before about empirically denied, that's the other version where this should have happened before, but it didn't. Because we've had situations where we were in this circumstance beforehand and we didn't see this outcome, right? Like, universal healthcare is going to turn us into socialists. Here we are 8 years later. You know what I mean? It's like we're still pretty capitalist. Like I think like that doesn't seem to be the defining point of this. Like we should be fine.
Sure.
All right. So like that downward spiral type thing. So that's like non-unique. I think is probably my favorite. It is I think the most useful. It's just like once
once you see how the disadvantage go away, like there is no more disadvantage because like that's I think typically where you'll hear novices pointed out is like they get the mentality but just not the language for it is like that's completely irrelevant. Or like that argument isn't relevant to what we're talking about today. That's the like more commonplace vernacular for non-unique in debate land.
Right. So I think it's hard to do that.
I'm sorry.
You got a little delay. Go for it, man.
I mean, I was just going to throw another example out there. It just popped into my head. And it's, if someone had a deforestation, we need to do a plan to stop deforestation. And they gave their impacts as climate change. And you got up there and said, non-unique, like even, solving this harm will not stop climate change in Oregon or whatever the heck it may be. You know what I mean? Like, so just know that there are other factors that are causing it. It's not attacking the link.
Because you're saying that this one policy does not uniquely determine whether or not climate change happens. Like, does not uniquely determine, is non-unique.
Yeah.
Right. And so.
And the follow-up to that would be like, it's a waste of money because it's like, if it's not going to solve it, then why are we throwing a bunch of money at it? I mean, these are next level, not next level, but, follow-up arguments and things like that. But if it's not, go ahead.
Last one. The turn.
I think this is far and away the most popular, right? Like this is
a turn for the worst.
This is like 90% of response to DAs that I see now.
Oh yeah.
Like
turn happy, and
sure people will stick a non-unique on it just to like see if they can kill it. But in terms of like going for one-shot kills as a debate strategy, I see people stick like 5 turns on a disadvantage, and like that's
all the other ones were defensive, right? Except this one, I think.
Yeah.
Right?
So this is your debate judo. This is turning your opponent's argument into your own argument. So actually making an offense. So that's a little bit to where, like, if you were to say, no, like more CO2, good. That's taking where they're saying something is a harm or they're something is some negative impact when in actuality, so turns can be done at 2 levels. They can be done at the link level. So either know what you're saying logically actually causes the opposite, right? So increased carbon has good impacts. I would actually argue that's more of an impact turn, right? Of like, we're granting the link that there's more carbon now.
No, the impact turn is harder to do, right? That's a link turn for sure. I would say that the vast majority of turns that you see are link level turns. Very few times do people actually do impact. For the climate change debate, it would be global warming good.
Mm-hmm.
So wouldn't you say, though, that an increase in carbon or like an increase in CO2, that is a link, but that also like that's something that's actually happening though, right?
No, because it's not. You're not granting that global warming happens. You're saying that that is good for plants, not necessarily. So you're saying that actually and plants are good for cooling the earth.
But like as the syllogism of it goes, though, they're saying like humans drive cars and fly planes, and therefore more carbon, therefore global warming.
Well, remember that.
So you're treating increased CO2 as a link.
Yeah, but the CO2 is being either linked to global warming or global cooling. You see what I'm saying? It's kind of like more plants equals better climate. And so that's what the argument usually goes for. It's great for life.
You say CO2 is good. CO2 is good because at Halloween parties it provides fog and ambiance to the environment.
Yeah,
boom.
But he's just saying that it just tries to turn the impact. It's kind of like more CO2 equals less global warming. That's what the elixir of life argument tends to go toward.
So I guess the differentiation there, like that seems fairly subtle. Like I understand a link turn is saying that no, this logical step, this thing that you're saying happening does not produce your impact. It actually produces the opposite. It produces something positive.
Right.
Impact then
the opposite of what you said. And so like especially on like the politics DAs or spending disadvantages, those really typical boilerplate thing where they say it's kind of like, oh my God, and this will, this is going to cost so much money. And you say, actually, we're saving money. So all of your impacts are the opposite. It
reminded me, one of the big ones I remember in this regard is like fracking. I had a long time ago, I was in a fracking debate, and like they say more fracking is like, we get up there and we're the environmental side and we're like, hey, fracking is bad. The more fracking you do, the more the environment suffers, right? Yeah. And then they get up and go, hey, fracking is actually good. The more fracking you do is good because despite any environmental problems, we have sovereignty and we don't require oil and there's less war and all the people who would die from those things is greater than the environmental impact of fracking.
I would classify that as
argument, but
I think that what that does is you're just outweighing on impacts. I don't think that's even a term. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's like my advantages are outweighing your disadvantages.
That's
the
true.
impact, the impact turn
on
why
this a teacher,
would be like a global warming good because it will open up trade routes north of Canada and the USSR.
Because it's cold in Chicago.
Yeah. And like seriously, that's like a legit position that I've heard that they're like the North Atlantic trade route is now open, and like that would usher in this like a new epoch of trade between nations, because like trade routes are everything when it comes to international economics.
Yeah.
So that's the global warming good argument. Is that the only way that you've seen, or is that, as you see it, the only way to turn an impact is actually just say like, no, that is a positive thing, and here's why?
Oh no, like the tundra, the permafrost gets thawed, and therefore opens up more.
No, I understand that argument. I'm saying in general, like in impact.
I'm giving an example of another way of saying global warming good. Right, you could have multiple sort of global warming good scenarios. One of them could be
I got one more global warming good.
Trade. What?
De-development. Humanity is killing the earth, so global warming is good because it kills all the people, and the earth will heal itself. Boom.
The entire DDEV argument is pretty much impact turn strategy. Like it's an entire strategy off of an impact turn.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Oh,
okay.
People die? 1 million people die? Good. That's better because the earth needs to heal.
So, like we said, there's not always great arguments.
It's called irony, people. Irony.
I think one of the cool but really important pieces to turns that I think is probably why they've really blown up in popularity is because if a turn is not addressed, if a turn is not, either directly refuted or turned back, like that's just another one of those little magic buzzwords and say turn back, then that flows through to the team that argued against it. So like the affirmative side actually gets that point. So a dropped turn is one of the most common things that's brought up when weighing, doing impact calculus at the end of a round, like in rebuttals. Dropped turns will win rounds. So that's a really important piece. And another common one is also like if the member speech brings up a bunch of new points. So if the member of if the member of opposition brings up a whole bunch of new points, they call those golden turns because the prime minister gets the first new response in the final speech. There's no response after that, but that's the first time they get to do it. So that's like where you get a strategic advantage and why it's a really bad choice for the second speaker on the negative side to bring up a bunch of new things, because those are golden turns that flow through. So even if you can
because
just
there's no response to the neg.
Right, like because the neg can't respond. So if you have the opportunity, if you have any capability to just like flexibly turn links or turn impacts in the PMR, like that's a beautiful thing. Like you just won a whole ton of ground right there. So I think that's probably partly why turns become so popular, is because they basically become voters. So like if you can get any turns to stick or any that drop, there you go.
Offense obsessed students as well, right? I mean, it's offense.
Right. I mean, and we
just don't reach. Just don't reach. I think there's a very untasteful way to run a turn where it's just like, oh, turn, you're wrong, and I'm right. Make sure you do all the connecting of the dots. We always talk about connecting the links and all this. Like make sure you do that, and it makes the turn way more real. Because when someone just goes, turn, okay, moving on, like that's not.
Right.
You didn't win your turn. You may have seemed like it. You felt like it. You felt good, but that's not actually doing anything. You just made an emotional reaction. So explain yourself.
I was guilty of that, man. I was guilty of that.
Say all these things out loud.
Yeah.
Say the words.
Turn happy, and they weren't turns. Yeah, it's a little embarrassing thinking back. So use them spare, like a really good turn will win a round, but man, trying to go for 7 of them, I think. Yeah. I don't know. All right. Hey, anyways, that's our time. All right. We got Matt Shapiro, Esquire, Tim Seavey, San Diego State University. I'm Jared Kavika Miller, communications professor.
Some guy.
Coach. Yeah. All right. We'll see you next week. All right. Bye.
Take it easy.
Thanks.